Went to college at Carnegie Mellon, probably one of the best institutions to go to if you want to become a corporate mad scientist. Subsequently, I went into biofuels, solar energy, among other things. But what I found is that there just isn't any profit in funding those types of technologies right now. Everybody's so interested in short-term profit. They've become so short-sighted that funding just isn't available right now for those things. And we need to change the way money works for that to actually happen. And I think probably the biggest problem that we face today, beyond anything else, is the way that money works. I think that what we need to do is recognize that our monetary system is not functional. It is a Ponzi scheme based on extensions of loans at 20 times or 30 times what you actually have in the bank. It's based on compound interest every year, and that what ends up is that you have banks that can lend out infinite amounts of money, basically, make money off of that money, and in order for the whole system to keep growing, which it has to keep growing under socialism, capitalism, communism, any other type of economic system that's discussed today, it all has to keep growing. And the problem is that we don't live on an infinite planet. We do not have access to space to colonize with our current technology. We have to recognize that we live on an island, this island Earth. And if we do not live within its bounds, Mother Nature is not a democracy. It's a dictatorship. If you do not live within her rules, she will come and kick your butt. Yeah. So it's important that we end the Fed, end this whole monetary system that that requires growth unendingly, so that we can live within the means of the earth and live with the rest of the creatures on this planet. Thank you.
Okay, so you had mentioned before that you went to school to you'd studied
mechanical engineering.
Okay, but you were interested in biofuels?
Yeah, I actually, when I was at Carnegie Mellon, I actually started working for the Center for Advanced Fuel Technologies. They're working on tar sands as well as biodiesel. Okay. So I worked on those projects there, and I've also worked on solar panels at Amonix in Seal Beach.
And you had said something before when you were talking, and I'm really not trying to be a pain here, I'm trying to understand. You said
Sure.
that those kinds of alternative energies, just people weren't interested in funding them because they couldn't get a quick turnaround on their capital investment. So my question to you, you're a smart person, you went to Carnegie Mellon, why not start your own company?
Because there's no funding. If I had the money, I would. But if there's no money there, then you can't make money doing it. So I mean, that's what it boils down to. If there isn't the investment there to actually get things off the ground and turn a profit, then you can't actually get something like that to work.
So,
and I've seen it several times because I've been a part of several startup companies.
So typically though, venture capital will be available if something is economically viable.
But the problem is that with fluctuations in oil price, that changes how viable it is on a monthly basis.
Okay.
So when oil prices were high, then that spurred a lot of interest and it spurred a lot of money. But as oil prices dropped and then haven't recovered very quickly, then there's a lot of time for all those projects that started to get funded to have the funding drop away, and then they start putting their funding into other projects that are more conventional.
Okay.
So, that's kind of what happens is as oil prices go up and down. Whenever there's a system, I took controls engineering when I was in college as well. Whenever there's a system and it starts to go unstable, what you'll see is that it will start to oscillate. And as it oscillates, the oscillations get larger and larger. And what I think we're seeing is the point where money is failing to influence resources the way that it used to, because our resources are not expanding. We're drawing them down very critically at this point. So we're actually getting to the point where we can't just say, okay, we'll put more money into it and then we'll be able to get more of X out of the ground or Y from our forests or anything like that. So we need to recognize the fact that we're actually reaching our limits in terms of what conventional fuels can provide us, and determine a way to provide that funding regardless of what's going on with the price of oil.
So basically what it seems to me though is that if if one were smart enough, if one had a good enough idea, you could convince.
If you have a good enough idea, it's going to be suppressed at this point.
You really think that?
Yes. Yes, I do.
Why do you think that?
Because I've seen many technologies that actually are completely viable that have been blackballed or snuffed out. Not personally, but I've read about and researched technologies like for instance, Nikola Tesla worked on Wardenclyffe Tower, and what that was an ionospheric accumulator. So it uses the charge that's accumulated in the ionosphere as the result of things like solar winds, charged particles hitting the ionosphere, and it actually can collect that charge and turn it into electricity. Mm-hmm. That's something that was being worked on in turn of the century, early part of the century. It's been around, and what he wanted to do was he actually wanted to take that power and then transmit it wirelessly to people's cars, houses, wherever it was needed. And the thing is that it doesn't require a grid, it doesn't require batteries, it doesn't require all this infrastructure, because the battery is the ionosphere itself. The battery is our planet in that sort of model. So I mean, there are technologies that have been around, but the problem is that when he went back to J.P. Morgan, who was funding him, and when he went to him and discussed, what was going on, J.P. Morgan basically asked, well, where's the meter? How do I charge for this electricity on a daily basis? And he's like, well, it comes out of the air. You can't charge for it. It's just once the equipment's there, it runs. And he couldn't get funding to pursue it any further. He got blackballed by J.P. Morgan. He was basically called a lunatic for the rest of his life because of that whole fiasco.
So you're basically saying that regardless of how economically viable some of these things are, in other words, there may be a return on investment, unlike the one you just described. Some of these technologies, there may be a return on investment, but the return on investment isn't high enough to compete with what's currently out there, which is oil. Well,
what I'm saying is that the alternatives that are being funded aren't a lot of them aren't really viable alternatives to go against conventional fuels, because a lot of the guys who are working on these projects don't want their cash cow to die. And when you figure out a way to just install equipment and have it run and produce electricity, that's their cash cow dying. They can't charge you by the second for using that equipment. They can charge you by the second for driving your car. So that's what needs to change. We need to change the way that we finance these things. We need to change our economic system and the way that we choose what to fund in order to actually make it so that we can move forward technologically. We need to have a cultural change, a changing our priorities, and we also need to have a change in the way that our entire economic system works. And I think that probably one of the biggest things with that is recognizing that we cannot just grow our way out of problems. That is probably the biggest problem that we have today, is that we try and grow our way out of our problems. And when you do that, you just have unintended consequences magnified on an industrial scale.
Thank you very much.